see it, you can feel it. Women's wrestling, the energy, the growth, the support. And this just kind of all feeds in. They're all feeding each other. It's a wonderful cycle.
For decades, women's wrestling in America was an afterthought, a niche sport with little support and few opportunities. But today, it's one of the fastest-growing sports in the country. From high school gyms to the Olympic podium, women wrestlers are proving they belong on the mat. For decades, wrestling in America was seen as a man's sport. Girls who wanted to wrestle were often met with resistance, told they were too weak, that the sport was too rough, too physical, too demanding. Some were outright banned from stepping onto the mat, but a few refused to accept those limitations. Tricia Saunders was one of the earliest pioneers. She started wrestling in the 1970s when there were no girls' programs, no official tournaments, and no real opportunities. If a girl wanted to wrestle, she had to join the boys' team, if the coaches even allowed it. Most didn't. Those who did often faced backlash from parents, officials, and other teams. Some coaches refused to let their wrestlers compete against a girl, forfeiting matches rather than acknowledging that a girl could hold her own. Even when girls won, they were often met with resentment rather than respect. But Saunders didn't just hold her own, she dominated. She won multiple national and international titles, proving that women could succeed at the highest levels of competition. Yet, even as she collected world medals, the sport remained in the shadows. Unlike their male counterparts, women's wrestlers had no scholarships, no collegiate pipeline, and no Olympic future. They were training, competing, and winning with no guarantee that their sacrifices would ever lead anywhere. Kristie Davis was another standout, proving that American women could be among the best in the world. She earned 9 world medals, more than any American wrestler, male or female at the time. But despite her success, there were still no major developments in women's wrestling at home. The U.S. men's team had resources, funding, and a direct path from high school to college to the international stage. Women had to carve their own way, often training in makeshift gyms, relying on personal coaches, and traveling with minimal financial support. It wasn't just a fight for competition, it was a fight for legitimacy. These women weren't just proving their individual worth. They were proving that women's wrestling itself deserved recognition. They believed that if they kept pushing forward, if they kept winning despite the obstacles, the sport would have to take notice. And slowly, things began to change. Young girls saw them compete and believed they could do the same. Small grassroots programs started forming. A generation of female wrestlers, inspired by the sacrifices of those before them, began to emerge. The fight for recognition wasn't just about competing, it was about proving that women belonged on the mat, that they had always belonged. And slowly, momentum started to build. The fight for recognition extended beyond the U.S. Women's wrestling faced similar struggles worldwide, with only a handful of countries taking it seriously, but pressure was growing. More and more nations were fielding competitive women's teams, and international tournaments were gaining traction. Advocates argued that if women could compete at the World Championships, there was no reason they shouldn't have a place in the Olympics. Then, in 2002, after years of lobbying by wrestlers, coaches, and supporters, the International Olympic Committee made a historic decision. Women's freestyle wrestling would be added to the Olympic program, starting with the 2004 Games in Athens. For the first time, women's wrestling had reached the biggest stage in sports. The dream that had been denied for so long was finally a reality. American women wrestlers now had the opportunity to not just win world titles, but to chase Olympic gold. And in Athens, they would have their first chance to prove that they belonged. Patricia Miranda made history, becoming the first U.S. woman to win an Olympic wrestling medal, taking bronze in Athens. Just 4 years later in Beijing, Randy Miller added another bronze. But the world was changing fast, and the competition was only getting tougher. For years, countries like Japan, Canada, and Russia had dominated women's wrestling. The Japanese, led by the legendary Saori Yoshida and Kaori Aicho, were nearly unbeatable. The U.S. had talented wrestlers, but without the same infrastructure and depth as other nations, they struggled to break through at the highest levels. The gap between American women and the sport's global elite remained. Then, in 2016, everything changed. Helen Maroulis stepped onto the mat in Rio de Janeiro to face Yoshida, the greatest women's wrestler of all time. Yoshida was a three-time Olympic champion, undefeated in 14 years of international competition. No one expected her to lose, except for Maroulis. With precision and poise, she executed the perfect match, defeating Yoshida 4-1 to win America's first ever Olympic gold in women's wrestling. It was a seismic shift. The U.S. had finally arrived. That victory wasn't just a gold medal, it was a turning point. It proved that American women could not only compete with the world's best, but beat them. It signaled the rise of a new era in U.S. women's wrestling, one defined by dominance, depth, and belief. At the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, Tamyra Mensah-Stock continued the momentum, becoming the first black woman to win wrestling gold for the U.S. She overwhelmed her competition with power and skill, showcasing the evolution of American women's wrestling. Meanwhile, Sarah Hildebrandt, Adeline Gray, and Kayla Miracle added to Team USA's medal haul, reinforcing that the U.S. was no longer an underdog, it was a powerhouse. And it wasn't just at the Olympics. At the 2022 World Championships, the U.S. women's team made history, winning the team title for the first time in over 2 decades. Wrestlers like Dom Parrish, Amit Elor, and Jakara Winchester led the charge, securing individual world titles and proving that American depth was stronger than ever. For years, Japan had been the undisputed leader in women's wrestling. But now, the balance of power had shifted. The United States wasn't just competing, it was winning, consistently, across multiple weight classes, at every level of international competition. What started as a struggle for legitimacy had transformed into global dominance. The American women who had once fought just to be allowed on the mat were now standing atop the podium, proving to the world that the U.S. was the new standard in women's wrestling. And with a new generation of talent rising, their reign was only just beginning. But their success wasn't just a reflection of elite talent. It was the result of a transformation happening at the foundation of the sport, a boom in high school and college wrestling that was reshaping the future. The shift began at the high school level. In 1999, Texas became the first state to sanction an official girls' high school wrestling championship. It was a small but significant step, proving that there was real demand for the sport. Slowly, other states followed: California, Washington, Hawaii, each adding girls' divisions, giving young wrestlers a chance to compete against their peers rather than being forced to wrestle boys. Then, in the 2010s, the growth exploded. More and more states sanctioned girls' wrestling, fueled by a rising generation of young athletes who had grown up watching American women win on the world stage. Parents, coaches, and advocacy groups pushed for equal opportunities, and by the early 2020s, over 40 states had officially recognized girls wrestling at the high school level. Participation numbers skyrocketed, making women's wrestling one of the fastest growing sports in the country. The momentum didn't stop there. For years, college wrestling had been almost exclusively a men's sport. Women who wanted to continue competing after high school had few options, often forced to travel internationally or join small, underfunded programs. But as high school participation soared, colleges took notice. The National Association of Intercollegiate Athletics, or NAIA, was the first to recognize women's wrestling as an official emerging sport, leading to the creation of competitive programs at schools like Campbellsville, Life University, and Southern Oregon. The Women's Collegiate Wrestling Association, or WCWA, provided another avenue for athletes to continue competing. But the biggest breakthrough came in 2020, when the NCAA officially recognized women's wrestling as an emerging sport. This changed everything. More schools began adding programs, scholarships became available, and for the first time, young girls had a clear path from youth wrestling to high school to college. The University of Iowa made headlines by becoming the first NCAA Power 5 school to add a women's wrestling program, signaling that the sport had truly arrived. What had once been a niche, underground movement was now a nationwide revolution. Women's wrestling was no longer a novelty or an afterthought. It was thriving at every level, fueled by a generation of athletes who had grown up believing that they belonged on the mat.
And with the infrastructure now in place, the next chapter of American women's wrestling was just beginning.
The landscape of women's wrestling in the United States is poised for a transformative era. In January 2025, the NCAA officially recognized women's wrestling as its 91st championship sport, with the inaugural championship slated for winter 2026. This landmark decision reflects the sport's rapid growth and the increasing opportunities for female athletes nationwide. Currently, over 1,200 women are competing in NCAA wrestling programs. A board of governors has allocated $1.7 million to establish the National Collegiate Women's Wrestling Championships, underscoring the commitment to nurturing this emerging sport. This funding will facilitate the organization of championship events and support the infrastructure necessary for sustained growth. As women's wrestling transitions from an emerging sport to a fully sanctioned championship, the future holds immense promise. The upcoming years are expected to witness increased visibility, enhanced competition, and greater support for female wrestlers. This evolution not only elevates the sport, but also empowers a new generation of athletes to pursue wrestling at the highest levels, solidifying its place within the collegiate athletic landscape.